Okay, so the session is being recorded. Dr. Thorpe, Professor Thorpe, you may begin.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne. I was just taking a quick response in the office here. A pleasant good afternoon to students all here in the final year. The importance, the qualified importance of the Capstone Project and the standard at which the outcomes need to be measured should not be understated. And neither should be overstated, but it should never be understated. It should never also be underestimated. It's a lot of work to complete a capstone project, albeit at the undergraduate level and or even beyond that level. But at the undergraduate level, when you leave UTech, the idea is that these projects are a signature and testimony to a body of work that represents you for life. And against the background of that, I would encourage every student who undertakes the project, qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods, based on what you'd have learned from the CRM course that you'd have done that would have prepped you coming into the project, to pay attention to that. Let me also preface this presentation, this short presentation, by also saying that it's usually about 90 to 95% of the work is student. And the need to have initiative on steroids, for want of a better word, cannot be understated. It means that the student, once you come with a topic, or if it is the supervisor who comes with the topic, it must be mutually understood and appreciated that there is a keen interest by all the parties who are participant to the exercise, because failing which, if there's a fall off on either part, the project never gets completed. Okay, and so much so, you, the student, who are the stakeholders vying to get the outcome, need to complete that project, right? So please make sure that when you're in groups, the groups are performing. Please make sure that, one person don't try to do the project if you're a group of 4. Otherwise, I strongly recommend a group of 1 if it comes to that, which is logical. Anyway, so I will move straight into the conversation of the quantitative study. Now, this is one of my favorite areas, which is why I know my dear colleague, Ms. Muir, asked me to engage it. We talk about this in the office all the while, in terms of what is it that we want to expect out of quantitative research. Why I like quantitative research, not so much because I'm the head of school, but just even as a faculty member, is that it is very objective. It is very objective. I can see the type of outcome that we should expect from the exercise. I'm not for a moment fooled that what I'm doing can't be measured, because when we say it is objective, it can be measured, So usually the measure, and I'm just paraphrasing, the usual measure is that we might write a program in computing. We might write a program, and where the program is some level of a prototype, and that prototype might be to, investigate, some data mining or machine learning approach to collecting data or finding anomaly in some data. So the tool that is generated is objective. The algorithm that we use is objective. There's some level of rigor where this is concerned, because we'll have to set up experiments in some instances, and we'll get into that in a moment in terms of the different types of the quantitative and then how we provide the analysis relating to them. So if we're going to, for example, find out, any anomalies in particular data relating to probably a fraud case, or we want to find out or predict where real estate, the cheapest real estate can be found, I would come up with a software tool that can do the prediction analysis. And to get that done, the rigor of it is that I'll have to set up an application, probably running on a server or as a client server setup with a database in the backend, which is actually referring to the system or the system processes that will be required to process the information. Okay, now as computing students between year 1 to year 4, you would have been exposed to many examples of programmatic applications from, you know, C++, Python, Java that would allow you to do those things. At the end game, you know, your program or your prototype in some instances may provide you with some solutions that, you know, provide, you know, a new outcome or a new situation that we can use to help, for example, solve another problem or help towards solving another problem, even if the existing problem that you're working on is not in itself complete. You know, we use quantitative research to do relationship analysis. So, you know, when we build the tool, will the tool be able to do something for us? So we will be able to use the tool to design some kind of relationship based on the inputs that we put to the tool. And those inputs we call variables, right? And of course, there are some elements of the quantitative research that speaks to effectiveness. And effectiveness has to really be measured too. Usually it has some parameters. So on the merit of that, let's quickly just think about what are the different types of quantitative research. Now, some of these things, sincerely, I would expect that when you did the CRM module as the computer research methods module, you'd have covered them in some form. I find out that sometimes people do a course, they forget everything in the previous course. And when you come to this one, it's coming like you have to do it all over. At this level, for final year students, my expectations are so high, next door to Jesus, for want of a better word, my young friends. Yes, for want of a better word. It's mirror, you're laughing, right? For want of a better word, in that the scenarios that you pitch yourself is that you have to be very selective. So if I'm going to supervise a project on quantitative, I tell the students upfront our perspective if they didn't think about their perspective before. So we could be doing a descriptive research, highly factual, you know, it's based on observation, it's based on evidence. Or you give me admin privilege as well, Ms. Mayor. All right, I'll let you in Celia and Laban. All right, so I'll help you if necessary here. So you have the descriptive, you have the correlational, you have the quasi-experimental, right, which is one that I'm using now with some students. Hopefully they will get it right, yes. And then there's the complete experimental, which I like the best. You know, that one, you know, that's the one I actually like the best. So I can tell you my preferences from the perspective of a supervisor taking on projects. What it means though, however, it is not a limitation to say if the supervisor like a particular type or style of the quantitative research, it means that you have to accept that supervisor style. You, the students, though, should know the differences between these types, right, or categories. So if we think about, you know, the whole areas, and let's just quickly just grab a few here and think about them. You know, when we think about, for example, correlational research versus descriptive, which is just highly factual, and you have to do a lot of investigation and collect the observations, what obtains is that you can have the descriptive versus the correlational, where you're looking at two or more variables and the relationships between them. You know, it really explains what is seen. It really explains what is seen. So you see, you know, if, in other words, like, you know, a doctor or a policeman is on a crime scene, he can't talk about what he never see. He has to talk about what he sees or what she sees. Those tend to fall into the descriptive category. Now, when the police finish collect their data and pass it to the judge and the jury, they will then do their interpretations. It's another form of the thing. But the idea is right now it's strictly descriptive, it's factual, it's based on what you see. There's no cause and effect. There's no cause and effect in this one. It is strictly descriptive. All right, strictly descriptive. So based on a thought, I said in making this presentation for Ms. Muir, let's probably give a brief example. So if you have some pizza trucks, and I'm not here reading word for word verbatim, you have some pizza trucks, and you're at home in your community, and the kids and the family like to buy pizza, just like how they buy ice cream off the trucks. You want to make a relationship between how you identify the different trucks based on a jingle that the truck would come in with when it comes into the community and a way to memorize it. The idea here, this is a level of correlational research because you're establishing, relationships between the jingle and the truck. You understand me? You're establishing relationship. So probably the higher the jingle, and the higher the jingle, it might mean something, or the lower the jingle, it might mean something. But the idea is that you can establish these basic relationships. Now, when you write up, so the assumption here into this meeting today is that, you know how to write chapter 1, 2, and 3, okay? And if you choose the quantitative method, if you're choosing a descriptive, which is strictly fact-based and observational, no multiplicity of variables, versus correlational versus any of the other types, the idea is then how, when you finish collect the data, for example, relating to the trucks, so just using the pizza truck and the jingles, what does all of that mean? What does all of that mean based on the factual data you would have been putting together from chapter 3 based on, the approach you would have been taking to collect that data? Now, at the end of it, it might produce some meaningful relationships that could be useful to someone. That is what chapter 4 is all about. What is the meaning? What is the usefulness of the outcomes relating to the study that you would have taken? I tell you, it takes time to write up these things. So I know Ms. Miller said there's another forum to write up these things, but to think it through, to do the necessary experiments based on the different approaches, and then now when you get to chapter 4, where you have to do a sort of an analysis against what you found, it meant then that your chapter 3 instruments were quite valid, and when you deployed them, you were able to use them in such a meaningful way that they provide rich meaning. Because if the instruments are not valid enough, what is going to happen? Your entire research project is going to go south, such that the meaning of the outcomes will mean very little to anybody. As a matter of fact, it's an ethical question. It's an ethical question, and Ms. Muir can debate that, I'm sure, all day, right? It's an ethical question if the relationships don't provide useful meaning. So this is very important as a part of providing the descriptive analysis that you have there. Now, I should say this before I continue. There is descriptive analysis in chapter 4, and then we can do what is called interpretive analysis. 2 levels of analysis. So when I give a group the template to write up the Capstone project from chapter 1 to the end, it will have some example subheadings that include some of these things I'm talking about. And I pay very careful attention to them. So the first thing is usually after you do the experiment or the assessment or study, the post surveys, what you really want to do is, what are the facts that you found out? And just describe, please, what you see. Don't write what you think. Don't write your emotion into that. You write what you see based on the facts. Anything otherwise devoids the usefulness with respect to what your results are supporting. So after you do the descriptive analysis, which is the facts, then you do the interpretive analysis. You know, the easy way for me to remember this normally is like a policeman. A policeman have to report what he sees at a scene. He can't tell you what he feels, you know, or what how you know what his personal interpretation is. The policeman behaves like the descriptive analysis component of your chapter 4, regardless of any of the techniques that we will talk about here. Then, when the policeman submit that report, it goes to a jury. Then the jury does what is called interpretive analysis. It is at that point you can now give an opinion, usually a very you know, relevant and expert opinion based on what you saw in the factual data. So you can't just write about an interpretive analysis whimsically. It has to be driven by what you saw in the facts and the meaning, the usefulness or meaning of what is in the facts. All right. So I go back to the truck, the pizza truck example. All right. So from the pizza truck example, and I'm using very simple examples, so I hopefully don't lose anyone, but please note your own capstone projects might have more substance than what I'm sharing in this short presentation. Is that, you know, we may find that by observation that there are variations in the ringtones from low to medium to high for the trucks numbered from 1 to 3. So you notice what I'm saying here, the trucks numbered from 1 to 3. These are descriptive facts, okay, quote unquote facts about the particular thing. And you know, truck 1 having the lowest ringtone, okay, so that's another kind of fact. Truck 2 having a median or a mid-level pitch ringtone, truck number 3 having a very high ringtone, that kind of thing. Okay, so these are facts. So truck number 1 recorded a 1 decibel level ringtone. Okay, another fact, because of having instruments to measure the ringtone. Truck 2 has a 4 decibel, truck 3 has a 10 decibel. All of these things represent the descriptive facts that comes out in your chapter 4 based on how you approach the experiment, you know, regardless of the technique. Against that background, given that these are the facts, then you can provide an interpretive analysis given those facts. So an interpretive analysis now looks at, okay, and another thing about interpretive analysis, we also call it predictive analysis, sometimes called predictive analysis. So it speaks to your ability to draw an inference, you know, an inference about the factual data. In our example here, I made reference or allude to the pizza truck and the ringtones that come off the truck. So by virtue of arguments, what could obtain is that now the interpretive analysis that, boy, truck number 3 as compared to truck number 2 and truck number 1 had a higher variation in decibel pitch as a result, right? In decibel pitch, and as a result, it led to more young kids gravitating to buy pizzas from that truck number 3. So this is an interpretation based on a given observation, right? And of course, it is based on a set of facts, okay, quote unquote facts. So now you're providing a sort of an analysis which is interpretive and not just based on the straight facts that you had before only. But now you're bringing in the point that, you know, the kids, you know, are, you know, really gravitating to truck number 3. I could change the pizza and put ice cream, and everybody here, we are all Jamaicans, right? We know about the ice cream truck coming around into the communities, you know, on a weekend, and when that truck start to, you know, pitch stone to the community, everybody know that the ice cream truck is there. That kind of thing. Okay, so this is now what you call an interpretive analysis relating, and is an example of that in that regard. Now, so that is really looking at that kind of study where the variables are mapped. You know, you have your pizza and you have the trucks, and you know, so those are your stated variables and so on. And you provide straight descriptive relationships and show the correlations between those descriptive elements. The next type of project you can have, which is one that I've been playing with this year with students, is the cause and effect, which is also another very effective type. It's called a quasi-experimental research study. Remember, my assumption here is that, boy, when you did the computing research methods course, these were things that you paid attention to at various points in time. When you meet a supervisor, these are some anticipations or expectations of the supervisor. I can say safely that I am one of those people. Notwithstanding, we would still discuss this as a supervisor to student relationship as suggestions if the student or you, the student, don't have your own suggestions. So here you go, cause and effect relationships. Less controlled by you, the research and research students, because you're going to have to rely on using samples and sample size relationships, and about the various sampling methods from convenient sampling, and otherwise to determine our random sampling to build out the cause and effect relationships. Now, the idea based on the quasi-experimental, and I find it also a very useful one. Some people think it's a bit tricky sometimes in that if you can't establish cause and effect, then why you choose it? But the argument is that when you select it, you would know beforehand that you can have a cause and effect. So I'll give you an example in a moment. I'll give you some examples in a moment. So in making this presentation, examples sometimes beat 1,000 words. Because one thing about research, sometimes when you just talk the very highfalutin definitions and you have regression variables and you have independent variables and dependent variables. Some people don't really even see it. Even sometimes you, the students, some of you don't even like it so much that it's not, can't even relate to it. And I must tell you, when you do the projects well, it makes the difference in the workplace of what you are paid. So if that job is out there for $5, $7, $8, $9, $10 million, you can get it with a first degree based on how well you approach this holistic final capstone project, and how you present yourself. So let me go into some computing elements as my example. All right. So for those of you who are here who do networking, and everybody did computer networks 101. So if the number of TCP packets in a data transmission continuously increase, I'm going to consider to be my independent variable, the packets keep increasing, then the likelihood that you have a sync flooding or denial of service attack is what we are trying to establish. Now, the denial of service is the dependent variable. Look at that. You guys tell me, and I just keep in this conversation real. Cause and effect. If the number of TCP packets keep increasing in the data transmission, it can lead to a denial of service. So the layman, if not a computing student here, can say, well, oh, so if you do certain things on the computer in terms of transmitting data over that computer, it's going to shut down the machine. Is that what you're saying? Possibly. Cause and effect. In strict computing terms, which is what you students would be familiar with in this kind of conversation, because you know this, I'm not going to ask if you know this. The TCP packets, once the rate of transmission on that keeps improving, that is an example of an independent variable. So that variable will affect or will affect, right? Cause, so with the TCP packets increasing, then you're going to have the denial of service. So the denial of service is the output effect in a sense here, which is what we call a dependent variable. Another example, which I experiment with right now in terms of projects, I just take it out by synopsis. We could look at the learning rate, right? And tracking the number of correct responses to some type of assessments in cyber training workshops on ransomware detection and other things, phishing detection, or I have another project looking at phishing tools and their usefulness. But the idea is that this can also be a cause and effect where how well people learn something, right, can determine their level of awareness. So the learning rate becomes my independent variable, and then how well they are aware at the end of that learning process is the dependent variable. You follow what I'm saying, my young colleagues? So what it
Dr.
simply,
Thorpe,
yes, Miss Mira.
two things. One is I know why example 2 is a quasi-experiment. I don't think you've said it because you're going to have 2 or more groups, and those groups are pre-existing, and then you're going to have like maybe a control group and an experimental group having access to the survey, and then you want to see the difference after they get
That's
some
right.
education.
That's right.
It would have
That's
been good if you
right.
said that.
That's
But
right.
but for example 1, I'm
Yes.
not sure why it's a quasi-experiment. I certainly see why it is a I see the relationship between the independent and dependent variable.
Right, but cause and effect. Yes,
For the
but why?
groups, not as in a quasi-experimental study, as you know, the groups pre-exist.
Yes, but in the context of the first example, remember, in a highly experimental setup where we are not necessarily having to deal with things like post-surveys. This one is going to have a high level of descriptive outcomes around it. In that, if I boot up a machine and basically start to ping one machine to the next machine, these guys who are in here, they know very well what I'm saying. You can basically bring down a network. Now, we don't have to go run a post asset, we don't have to do a post survey with no control groups for that. This, in other words, these are factual pieces of data that the literature supports. But what we are doing in this study is to test these variables. And when we test these variables, and I could say I like the first one even more than the second one, because I don't really have to bring in any number of control groups to get that measure of assessment. There's a statement of fact that is well understood in the computer networks literature that if we increase the TCP packets, it is very likely. But now we're going to apply it to a scenario. We're going to apply it to a scenario. And in example 1, it's not very detailed. It's just a snapshot of an argument. I could go into a very detailed argument about it. But the idea is that I can use it for cause and effect, because what we might be trying to figure out, and give my own background in cybersecurity, I'll be trying to figure out if it is the TCP packets that might be causing the denial of service, or probably if it is some other activity outside of the TCP that could be causing it. We could then do a process of elimination in that regard. I'll give you why. So here's the analysis. The analysis relating to that first example of the cause and effect is that if I provide descriptively, and I'm just using some arbitrary numbers here, that if the number of TCP packets increase from 20 to 40, right, end-to-end over a peer-to-peer network, we see that 40 packets is a threshold that may have been reached, and anything over that threshold could mean that the computer starts shutting down quickly. But these are probably stated facts that we're testing, Ms. Muir and others who are here, right? And students, others, such that we want to know if it is a cause and effect relating to the TCP. It might reveal other things coming out of the study afterwards. We might find out that it might not have been because of TCP packet increase. It might be because of probably some other buffer overflow, or it might be because of a botnet or some other activity, which we don't have to discuss here. But the idea is that this is the rudimentary cause and effect in a computing research project. In other subject areas, the approach could vary. As a matter, in other subject areas outside of the computing discipline, example two is more observed. So when I take on a group, Ms. Mira and students, I find out if the group likes to write code. If you like to write code and you truly demonstrate that you like to write code, it's coding project we're going to work on. Like one guy just called me saying that he wants to work on a straight coding project. I say, yes, we can start work on it from this summer. He wants to finish it next year, right? So once you have that interest. So in example two, more to what you are said, you might have a sample size of students, 200 or probably more students, 20% of the student groups obtain 80% or more with respect to satisfactory responses, which could be the elements of your control group, different student groups. Now, what obtains in terms of that is that 80% or more with respect to the responses did not really, 20% got 8% or more responses. What might not be here is the fact that 80% or more responses is what determines correct responses. So 20%, if I went on to move from the descriptive analysis in a moment, is that if I go example 2 first, is that wait, 20% of the population obtaining 80% or more by interpretation, right? Or by predictive analysis. But remember, interpretive analysis and predictive analysis is used interchangeably. It could suggest that, listen, these people have a low understanding of the whole issue of potential ransomware in the environment, potentially. And I might give them a binary score of 0 based on how and a binary score of 0 is the awareness score. Or the awareness score is what is tracking the dependent variable. Whereas the learning outcomes and the learning rate, which is based on the 20% only getting 80% or more based on that, is suggesting that, hey, listen, you're going to have to do something about your cyber awareness program, because 20% is just not going to cut it. Probably it should be 80% or more of the population getting 80% and above in your assessments, in your post-survey assessments based on the workshops, that will be able to determine this kind of outcome. I hope everyone is understanding it. Is this level of reasoning I want, in terms of seeing students coming out with, in terms of their interpretation. So when you're writing up chapter 4, I can say, for what I've done on this, I'm very thorough with this thing, that I will share with the group, even full papers of examples of these things, full research papers. So our students who are here, you have access in UTech to the IEEE and ACM libraries. All of these type of examples I am referring to, you can go and find research papers that build out these things. Your supervisor can be kind like me and I give you them. If you're going to read them and then appreciate how you can apply them to your study, then great. That's fantastic. But the enthusiasm has to be there to drive those outcomes. You see what I mean? So when I look at the predictive analytics now, or the predictive, so in chapter 4, you section chapter 4 and say descriptive analysis in one section, and in the next section, I put interpretive analysis, regardless of the formal approach that I'm using. And then if I'm doing, in this case, predictive analytics or predictive analysis, I'm seeing that at a threshold level of 40 packets for the TCP. Listen, man, you're experiencing a DDoS attack, right? So we infer that the potential for botnets or possible buffer overflows could be sitting on those local networks, or on that local network for which you are experiencing this from your experiments, right? From your chosen experiments. Whereas in example 2 now is what I suggested earlier. The score of 0, awareness could be low, the score of 1, awareness is high. Or you can flip that around any way you choose to do it. So, the students, as students, you really need to be thinking in this kind of manner, in this kind of vein, when you're doing the project. So, and listen, the thing about quantitative experiments in particular, because they are so observed, meaning that it's very logical work, meaning that if you don't see it, you can't say it, you did see it. In other words, you have to say what you see based on the experiment. And therefore, a supervisor like myself and otherwise would be attuned to looking to see what the observations are and the facts of what the observations are. So you, the student, can't come to the supervisor and say, you see, a set of observations which you did not investigate. Both you and the supervisor should be in agreement that what you have observed are consistent with what is the outcome. Because you see, when you take on a major project, and I'm just adding the 2 cents here, both the students and the supervisor, you know, are like students together in the project. Because if this was not a research, if this is a research project, both the supervisor and the students are both looking for answers. So the supervisor is looking for an answer too, like you, the student, and just showing the same level of enthusiasm as you. It's not that the supervisor necessarily knows the answer, but the supervisor would know, you know, some of the techniques and the approaches and some of the, you know, the guide that will sort of help determine what the answer should be coming out with, but don't necessarily know. Now, when you think about the full-blown experimental research, because each of the others have a level of experimentation in them, but straight, rigid experimentation, where we sort of put some controls in place, where I set up my server and I set up my switch and I have 3 or 4 client machines, etc. For me, those are my control experiments or my control group of experiments. I may or may not necessarily be using people. I could be using people as well in this context as well. And the idea is that we can proceed to building out those experiments. So let me give you an example of a full experimental research project. These things tend to be very systematic. So simple things that I look for, or we look for when we look at building out the straight experiment, straight programming prototype. We're in the School of Computing. So I'm using this discussion very specific to the School of Computing and Information Technology. In engineering and or in the School of Business and other places, they may have variations to the experimental research. But because we are in the School of Computing, here how we knock the fact that this is experimental. You're going to write a new algorithm. Everybody here know what I'm talking about. So if we're going to do a full experimental research, we're going to write a new algorithm to do some task on the machine. Probably just to do ransomware detection, probably just to do probably to determine anomalies coming off of a device. It could be to do any of those specifically, but I'm going to write a new algorithm. In addition to writing a new algorithm, I may be writing a complete software prototype to run the algorithm. So it might be written in Java, Python, C, C++. Those are straight experimental projects, very objective. There's no blurred line between that. This is, in my opinion, well, and I say my opinion, it's just my opinion. This for me is the full-blown approach that I like to see when students take on the quantitative. In the ideal case, Mark, the quasi-experimental is another form, which I appreciate. But the idea is that I like to see the algorithms. I like to see the code. I like to see the prototype. I like to hear that. You know, a lot of jobs are around this piece as well. You understand me? So for me, you know, it is very easy once we take on this approach to have a definitive measurement of what you are seeing as your independent and dependent variables based on the project, you know? So an example of an experimental project, Miss Mary, you see that this thing taking me more than 45 minutes. When I get into the thing, like, they can take me a full lecture. So the experiment that I'm thinking about here, when I wrote this slide for this thing for you, is that the experiment, for example, is that I'm trying to log, I'm trying to do some logging analysis of what is going on a physical machine and on my virtual machines. So I might write an application that tracks the logs and the timestamp of logs on what is coming off of a machine. And in this project, I will probably now write a log detection algorithm, and I write it probably in Java. So if you're telling me that you can see when VBox is running and how often it is running on the machine and how it's behaving, etc., etc. I'll probably write a program in Java where Java is running its own virtual machine and it is logging and tracking what those other VMs are doing, or what the physical disk of events are doing within that environment. This is highly descriptive. This is very highly descriptive, but it's still an experiment where I'm producing a prototype or an algorithm to support the outcome of the project in the test environment, right? And usually spend time writing this up. We might set up a sandbox where we have a client server sandbox, and we will have the log detection, algorithm, tracking the timestamps and any machine misbehavior. So, and the machine misbehavior, I'll qualify it in a minute. So every 5-minute interval, you might see, for example, that the physical client server environment is shutting down on a particular subnetwork somewhere. It is shutting down between 9 and 10 a.m. on November 21, 2021. All the data nodes are suspended based on what you see in the log files after you run the program, right? So if we're doing a full experimental project where we wrote the code for this and we have the dashboard and the algorithm supports this, right? Then these are things that we'll be looking for. And of course, hold on there. Okay. All right, Mr. Grandison. Okay, you mute your mic. All right, good. So I might be tracking and seeing what is happening, and then it's a full experiment where it's straight code, love code, Python code. Mark, you in this slide, I could have had a whole window with just the straight Python code or Java code or anything to that effect. Those represent highly descriptive experimental solutions that when you bring that to a Viva, when it is being evaluated, somebody will ask you about your code and objectively what the code does when it calls a particular function and execute something on that machine. I say, yeah, yes, that makes sense. So it is well observed, right? So in this, I'm just giving you a typified example of how that this could work without necessarily going into a discussion about code. And then now the interpretive analysis from the experiment is that when the machines had failed, I would be looking for the fact that on November 10, 2021, based on the logs that were collected, the system event logs or the application logs, all the routines on the machine had stopped, both on the physical machine and on the virtual machine. Everything just stopped running. So basically, what that means is that if the virtual machine disk and the physical disk, all the activities have stopped running, hey, hold on, it looks like the whole network could be shut down there, as one potential inference coming from that. It could be something else. So I ran an experiment like this already, and the truth be told, what the results showed is not that the network was shut down, but a server was on fire. A server was on fire in the server room. Hold on. Yes, from I'm finishing up a session here with students. Probably about that time. Yes, that's a good time. Yeah, so what obtains with that is that we can use this information now to say, so if was this happening on a daily basis over or every hour on the hour for the whole day, as a part of that experiment, and the log files would show that based on my Java dashboard or my Python dashboard, and we would write this up in chapter 4 as a part of what was observed from the experiment, which means that you must do the thing, you must write the code, you must do the simulations, you must run it on the physical machine, you must do the live test, you must then get the data coming back from the machine so you can know definitively that this is what was happening, as a compromise to the machine. No, I have not taught many of you who are here, probably if not most of you, you know. So, the fact of the matter is, when we do a course, especially the experimental courses in programming or in networking and the like, we have so many examples that support experimentation, which is like what I'm describing here. So in writing up chapter 4, it means, you as a student have to know your thing. You can't guess and spell the thing, because the fact of the matter is that when you finish as a fourth-year student, I'm going to almost call you my equal. You don't have to do no master's degree or no PhD. You're a professional. And when the industry hire you, they hire you based on what you know and what you come to the table with. No guess and spelling thing. So it don't really matter if you're in IS or straight computer science or you're in any of the sub-disciplines. Once you demonstrate that you have mastery of what you are doing, you should be hired and they will pay you. I kid you not. Which is why I take the major project so importantly. So anytime Miss Mira asks me to do something, I will fully cooperate with her. She's working very hard to support you all. So I'm asking you not to disappoint her. Get the work done. All right? You need to just get the work done. And importantly, know your content, because it's one thing to know the technique. I'm just leveling with you now. It's one thing to know the technique, but if you don't know your content, you can't complete the project. You'll be bluffing and guessing and spelling. And I'm not sending nobody out into the private sector if you don't know the thing. You have to know it because they need to pay you well. I believe in that, but you have to know your content. So in any projects, quantitative or qualitative, it's not just trying to get a pass here, but you're not going to get no work in this field. Let me tell you point blank. So I want you to pay attention to the capstone and do it at the best of your ability. And if you're working with supervisors and you're not getting written, detailed feedback, you report it, even if it's me. That is how serious this thing ought to be, where you get written, descriptive, clear feedback that supports the outcomes of what we are describing here. So every final year student, in my opinion, is literally like my colleague aspiring to be, which means literally you take your professional career seriously. You don't guess and spell yourself. You know what you're doing, you're sure about what you're doing, and that is what SCIT has prided itself on over the years in terms of the outcomes from CAS to UTEC. Man know the thing, woman know the thing, and they get the work. And therefore, that is why when you take on a project, in a particular experimental or any element of the quantitative, the content that supports the measure of like what I'm describing here is observed. So I leave it at that, Ms. Mira. I didn't, listen, I could go on and talk about how you write, further how you write and so on, but you say you have another segment where Mr. White and so on will do the writing, and I can defer to that. But let me just say another
No, the writing was more, sorry, the person's coming to talk about writing, in a sense, is more about I'd call it like a reminder of the dynamics of writing.
Or APA formats and so on.
Yeah,
APA.
and also and like maybe how to approach editing, that kind of part of the writing.
It's a lot of work. Listen.
Yeah, it is a whole approach by itself. So I'm bringing somebody from the academic writing team to come and talk about writing. Really about the editing, I would say. But first you have to write before you edit.
That's true. And then, so therefore, what I am talking about here in terms of the quantitative, or if you're going to do qualitative, what this discussion we're having in the context of the content relating to what chapter 4 will have is technical writing, which means in the School of Computing and Information Technology, students need to do technical writing, which means you know the thing even better on the lecture. Lecturer have to shit there and say, yeah, yes, you're right. Because, as a lecturer, if you are speaking the subject matter for which you are doing the project, I, as a supervisor, who should also be a subject matter, or even if I'm not a subject matter in your specific topic, when I go and review the subject matter, the technical writing that is used to unearth the quantitative approach outcomes of the study, I need to see the quality of writing like what we have here. So the interpretive analysis or predictive analysis or the descriptive analysis must demonstrate that you understand the content. You don't bluff the content. You know it or you don't. A final year student must know and show that they know the content. No playing around. If we're going to write code, we write code. If we're going to do cause and effect studies relating to simulating a test bed where we have client server running, we must know what we're doing with that as well as computing students. So that's why I tailored this this discussion in the context of that. So I want students to treat that with a certain level of gravity. And as I said, when you're working on the project, I know some of you say, boy, I just want to pass here, man. I hear everything, you know. When the pin drops, some students are saying, you know, I just want to get a C grade and move on. You don't want to get a C grade. If you're aiming for a C, you're going to fail. You're aiming for an A or A plus. If you drop below that, it meant that you were on your best game and you're putting in the effort. And I want to warn all of you, don't leave the project on one person to try and do, and the rest of you ride the coattail of the other person. The rest of you will feel this thing. Caution to the wind. In other words, if you take on a topic, love it. Otherwise, you alone work on the project.
Or like embrace it for the time of the project.
Boy,
at least for that time.
Boy, Miss Muir,
at least you need to embrace it for that time.
Miss Muir, I said love it, you know. I've gone into the loving of it, not just embrace it. I say when you embrace it, you might embrace the wrong thing. And then all you're trying to do is praying to Jesus Christ. When can I finish this project? And hopefully the person who knows the most technical content to write up on these experimental approaches will get me through. Caution to the wind.
All right, so I think we'll invite questions.
Yeah, I will, yes. I want to entertain some questions. I see I'm getting some calls here, but yes, let me get some questions. I appreciate that. So I'm now, and I'm going to stop sharing.
I noticed that one, no problem. I noticed that one person actually wrote "sigh" in the comments about 10 minutes in, which was interesting. That was not a question. Yes, it's still there in the chat. Anyway, anybody with a question?
Oh, Hilton. You should probably ask Hilton why I'm sorry, man. We're all one big family, you know. We can talk, man. Nobody don't need to be afraid.
I don't think the message was meant for everyone.
Oh, but it come out to everyone.
To everyone, if you're sending to a particular person, then you know there's that option.
Okay, it's so good. Don't worry. But the side probably still means something that you want to speak on. You know what I'm saying? You know,
no, sir. It was definitely not for anyone and about what you were saying, sir.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. So I'm encouraged. Ask your questions. Ask away.
Right. So last week, okay, here's a question. Are there any software, it doesn't have an S, are there any any software that you recommend for processing the data that we're collecting?
Oh, well, outside of like SPSS and in turn, SPSS can be used to do some of the standard, or you know, you could use R. You know, you could even use Excel if you ask. I mean, as simple forms, right? But SPSS and R are two good ones to provide certain level of regression analysis and so on the data. You know. So those are the basic ones that I use. R or SPSS.
Right, and as you know, some of you were taught other software programs in CRM, RES24, so you can certainly use those. The key really now is to use a software that's appropriate for the research question. And for example, just to extend to what Dr. Goff is saying, you could present like your descriptive data using simple software like Excel or another spreadsheet, and then use a statistical package for another part of the program. Because at the end of it, even if you were to use SPS or PSPP or R, the end of it, you're also supposed to present the data in a way that is clear to the reader. So every table or figure should be labeled. It should have a title. It should be clear what are the variables and what they mean, and maybe it might need a key. So you're expected to go beyond just, oh, the software did that, so therefore we can't do any more work. That is rubbish.
Or in other words, what you're saying, do proper annotation
Yes.
of the submission. Yes, that's correct.
Right, but essentially, Cassandra, you need to use the software appropriate to your research question.
Yes, yes. And you know what I should also encourage is that in the IEEE and ACM library, you know, there are examples, you know, of papers relating to what I am talking about here, where you know, if you're a project that you're working on, you might find, given the body of work in the literature, you will see if it's a quasi-quantitative approach, if it is a straight experimental approach, you have published papers out there that show as well how it is written up, you know, and written up properly, you know, that can support some of you doing the thing. But the truth be told, you know, some of my students tell me, say, sir, I can't bother with that. So I say, if you can't bother with that, you know, you're not going to finish the project. Nobody not going sorry for you. So in other words, all the information is there to support all of you being able to complete the activities, you know, relating to.
Right, you're here to read and write for your degree.
Yes,
It's just that you didn't know you're here to read and write.
yeah. It's a lot of work.
That's part of the university degree. It's not only say writing programming, if that's what you love to do. University degree requires reading and writing everywhere in the world.
And don't come with anything substandard, because if it's not me, there are other persons in the school who are going to look at it at a committee level and going to say, what is this? So you see, if, for example, you're working on instruments that you need to get for the ethics clearance, make sure the instruments are valid, that supports the ethics clearance, because in of itself, that might not be ethical, you know, so you want them to be, because that is what going to inform the outcome of the study. So if you're using a quantitative approach, make sure that you capture very clearly what is the design, which research design you're really using to support that approach. And you and the supervisor work at it together, and don't drag your feet at it. You know, you need to move at it daily, you know, till you get the outcome. It's a lot of work though, but it's a lot of work.
Question for the students who are here. There are over 45 students here.
It's 49.
No, that's include me and you and
the
interpreter.
Yes, me and you, that is true.
So me and you and the interpreter, so over 45 students.
That's right.
And so of the over 45 students representing probably as many as a dozen or more major projects, there actually are a lot altogether. I think it's over 40, as many. My question to you is there anybody, and it's no problem at this point if you don't know, is there anybody who has a research design where there's either one or more of your research questions? You either don't know which type of research design it is, that's what I talked about for today, descriptive, correlational, quasi-experimental, and experimental. You either don't know which one it is, or you're not sure how to do the experiment, how to do the analysis. Because if you don't know how to, that's what I spent a little bit of time on last week, if you don't know how to approach it, that's going to be a major problem. Obviously. So please, this is the time enough, but you don't want to get to the end of the major project and you're completely showing that you don't know. This is the time. If it's still unclear, this is the time to speak up or to write your question in the chat. Asking questions is what is good. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Farr?
Oh, most definitely.
This is the time to ask a question. I don't want to hear in 3 weeks or in 2 weeks that you didn't have a clue about this. That's why you're here to ask questions. So we're both here to answer questions. We're going to assume that everybody here is clear. Because it couldn't be that you are paying, you or your parents or guardians or the student loan is paying money and you have no clue and you won't have the courage to speak up. Here's a question. Gloria says, Prof, a full development and a prototype are two separate things, question mark.
Full development and a no man, so full development is consistent with the prototype, because remember when you think about that prototype, it's not writing a GUI and don't have the backend code to support the functionality of the GUI. You understand? It should be able to do at least a few things right. Even some of the tabs or the functions on that GUI should have backend code running that supports an outcome. That is a prototype. But if you just put some people, I mean, I hear some students come already saying, "Sir, I was going to build a GUI and that's my prototype." That's not a prototype to support your full development. It needs to have clear functionality in the backend, because really and truly you're also demonstrating competency with respect to the fact that you can actually write code to drive that outcome. All right, full development, full 100 businessman. All right, full. All
right, as a reminder, everybody, we have 3 types of projects. Nobody this year is doing a full, so they're called research and main development, and research and major development. Nobody has elected to do research and major development. Either most people are doing research and mini development, and some groups are doing research only projects.
And let me advertise right here. Right now, I have jobs left, right, and center hitting my desk, from cybersecurity to software development. So if people here are serious and they're doing good work, you can reach out to me at the school and send in your resume so I can put on this thing. And I do a little mini interview with you to see, you know, where you are and so on, and send them on. Listen, man, there's no shortage of job. Companies are knocking down the door.
On that note, guys, and the problem is that the shortage with the students who are weak. And so when you go to finish and say, "Oh, you tech never do nothing for me," it's because you, sorry, I mean, it's a bit late now to be telling you this, but at the end of it, they actually want people who can work, who work hard, who can write, who can think, who can, all the things that we're actually doing this thing, that's what they want.
That's correct.
They want writers, thinkers, coders, people who can even just look at software and say, "Oh, quality assurance," even did a class. They want people who can do those things. That's what they want, guys.
Hallelujah. Amen. Hallelujah. Amen. It's church preaching this one. As a matter of fact, what really obtains is that when you do the major project, many of the companies calling us, so are those guys working on networking or security or AI, or, you know, are they doing system surveys? You know, the companies like align themselves. And so the Capstone Project is one way. You see, students, it represents you. It's like that final chapter of you that demonstrates what you would have learned over the 4 years and what you also brought to it as extra, right? So that when you are being employed or considered by the potential employer, you are the right person, man or woman alike. And I can tell you this, and take me for my word on this, you know, 3/4 of the population out there managing IT and the IT industry in Jamaica are UTech, CAS UTech graduates, and their expectations are very high. I taught quite a few of them in the past, Miss Mira as well, and they have high standards. They don't expect anything less. So when you join that team, the expectations are very high, next door to Jesus. So I have young managers. I have young managers like yourself. I'm talking about some of them in their 20s at Digicel and all over. I'm so proud of them. And they came through this program like you. And what they in other words, they remember their projects. And when they got those jobs in those organizations, it was a project like the Capstone that catapulted them. That within 3 years, they turned managers over people who are there 10, 15 years. Now, isn't that impressive? So that is the caliber of who you want to be, so you can be in the $1 million post standard just to get a grade that might be a C-, so you can just get out. It's not going to help you.
Also, I need to bring as a guest speaker at the beginning of major project.
You probably need to do that.
No, just the last 10 minutes. We need it in September.
I'll do that, Miss Mira.
I'll come and give you the pep talk.
There's so many things.
I can't only ask the best students if they would have liked this pep talk, because some students they're too late for this pep talk.
No, man, you have to tell everybody, man. No.
Listen, too late.
Everybody, man.
Guys, all of you have potential.
Exactly.
All of you have potential. So
Exactly.
what I mean by it's too late, I'm just wondering when they are going to finish this semester. So
Not
every
too
one of
late,
you,
man.
you got to
Not
fourth
too
year,
late.
you all without exception, full of potential. It's just that some of you at the moment are not utilizing it.
Yes, yes. And some get lazy too. They don't want to know work. I know some of them right now. And they're not necessarily on this call, but I know some of them even outside of this session here. They're lazy. And I don't want to say it's a pandemic. They're lazy, they don't want to do any work. It's the ones who have been riding others back for a period of time. It catch up on them now. And all of you who are here must realize the Capstone Project takes time. It takes time, and it takes input, and it takes effort. And if I'm saying that as the professor here, and I'm going to say an undergraduate major project is a heap of work. You have to put in the work. Because for me to spend 3 hours, let us say I spend 3 hours a week looking at a capstone project, I know you have to spend probably 3 or 4 times that time, or I expect you to. And then I would value the fact that my 3 hours was well spent. Yes. And we get probably published papers out of this as well. But I'm home to, if there are queries outside of this meeting and people want to ask me, I'm home to answer them, Miss Mary can send my details to them. And
All right, Dr. Columbus, thanks very much for coming. I don't see any other questions.
Yeah, man.
So I will
I'll
stay
leave
on
you.
for another few minutes with the
Sure,
students. Thanks for
sure.
coming.
You're very welcome, Miss Mary. Have a pleasant one. A pleasant evening, everyone.
Yes. Right, so students, I am a little bit concerned. I don't know the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it's more than 3 groups. I don't know what the number is. I will need to go and do an audit soon, but there are several groups. I think it's as much as 5. There are several groups that don't have ethics clearance. Like one actually emailed me last night to say that they haven't submitted it because of some concerns of their supervisor. But I know that, for example, there are 3 subcommittees. I'm in one, and several of them in my subcommittee alone, there's been notations. So in fact, let me just ask that question first. Is there anybody here, show of hands, who has submitted a major project and not been approved? No, the one, before I go, yeah, just show of hands. What I can say though, in the last week, right now we're having major, ethics committee meetings every single week. So I know the person who was supposed to send the emails is now ill for the last few days. So if it was approved in the last maybe 8-9 days, you would actually need to go to the ethics folder and see the, in fact, let me just show you for a second. But anyway, I don't see anybody with showing hands. I say, is there anybody here? Can either send me a private message or put up your hand. So everybody here, without exception, has ethics approval or don't care. I don't know which one. I see no hands, so that means everybody here has ethics clearance. Oh, find your hand. Okay, so I know I met with one group yesterday that they were, I think, approved just in the last very short time. So let me see. So let's not worry about. So Amanda, what your group has got approval? When did you submit the ethics approval? The ethics stuff, the ethics form?
We haven't submitted as yet.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, that's the group that emailed me. So Dominique, are you in the same group as Amanda?
No.
Huh? Dominique, have you submitted it? You or somebody that's in your group? Dominique? Not yet? Oh, okay. Right. So, okay. So, so there are 2 groups without submitting. And there's one group who told me that, is there anybody here who, maybe nobody here. There is a way I can show you. Let's see, let me share my screen. Is it open still? I don't know. Might be too by the way, did you know UTech students won the This Is Mother competition, and I think the ones who won got $2 million Jamaica. UTech students continue to do well. I am looking for, let's see, where would it be? Looking for my email. Not that one, this email. Email, so I can't look for the ethics. All right, I don't even know which one. Let's look at this. Go here. All right, just a little smaller. So which one? Not that. Let's see if I can find it. Was it this one? I think it was this one. Yeah, I think. Oh no, not this one. So anyway, but look at this project, for example. This project has not been yet approved. If it was approved, it would say yes in this column, final decision at meeting. So the person who submitted the project would be able to essentially look at the project. Anyway, so I'm going to assume then that everybody here, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to assume that everybody here, we're going to assume that everybody here is fine with ethics. So the idea right now is that next week, Thursday, there are going to be 2 short presentations. Well, they're going to be that short. Altogether, it'll be maybe about an hour to hour and a half, where we're going to be talking about oral presentations that will help you prepare for the final Viva. And in the following week, I'm thinking of doing it on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, because Thursday will not be a good time for the person who I've invited to do a presentation about writing up the project. So next week, Thursday is the next meeting. Is there any other pressing concern that anybody has? Yes?
Just to touch on what Dr. Frank was talking about.
Can't hear you.
Just to touch on what Dr. Thorpe was talking about in regards to students who basically depend on other group members.
That's a very important topic, yes.
I'd like to know if there is like a grading system in the
Yeah, man. Well, 2 things. One is in the grading system, there's actually a component called continuous assessment, which is, I think it's 15%, whatever the amount is, whether it's 10 or 15%, I do have it memorized. But outside of that, if somebody did nothing, they get 0. So if you're in my project, and every supervisor should do that. So what I tend to do is 2 things. I tend to no longer, I have never supervised a project where anybody does nothing. If they do nothing, they can't be in the project. So usually they do very little, you know, and then you kind of think about it. So I have supervised, let's just take my examples over the years. I've supervised projects where at the end of it, it goes the best case scenario. The project is just that the borderline between A and A minus. And I'm looking at it and going, okay, so after I wait back and forth, I say, okay, just barely make an A. It was like it was so close to A minus, it's like I bumped it up based on everything. And then there was one, I'm giving a real example. There was one student, it was when we were pre-COVID. Student comes in literally right before the final Viva and says to me, literally like 10 minutes before, and is asking me to explain the part of the project that is, you know, you guys call it my part, her part of the project. In fact, the part she was going to present. So I partly answered, but really said, I don't have time to go through this right now. You're going to present your own project. So when I was grading, I sensibly gave her a different grade than other people. I hear from the group leader that she had me off because why? She should have got a C. I didn't even give her a C she deserved. All along she didn't do enough work. And I didn't just wait based on the 15% part because she did less work for the whole project. And she does things that because the group get A, she should get A too. That's nonsense. So I've had it everywhere from students happily tell me that these 2 other people did not do much work or no work, and I give grades accordingly, or sometimes it's painfully obvious. What I do as a strategy, this with major project, is I ask, from what I've observed, I also ask students to rate each other But yes, if somebody don't do no work, they should fail. If the group is a minus quality at the end, and somebody just is enough to get a C now, because there's no C minus anymore in the new grading system, could be that one person get A, one person get B plus, one person get C, and one person get F. I mean, that's very unlikely, but there's no automatic thing that because you're in a group. Make it worse, I would do it in the politics, like you guys have, oh, this is the programmer, and the programmer only does that. The programmer, if there are the programmers, should actually know the rest of the project too. You're supposed to know your entire project, even if you didn't work on every part of the project. But in fact, every section, everybody should do a little bit of work. So I went even further. So it should be that everybody contributed in part to chapter 1, and to chapter 2, and to chapter 3, and to chapter 4, and to chapter 5. Even in part, I don't even mean equally. And certainly there should be some overall equal thing. So yes, without any doubt, you don't do no work, and it is not wrong for you to report on the people who are not doing any work. So if you're in a group of 4 and it's you one doing the work, now the one thing I would say with Dr. Thorpe is we don't allow form the groups of 1. But if it is that you start with a group of 5, it's only 2 you finish it, only 2 you should get the grade. Groups of 1 are not formally part of major project system. Hopefully that answers your question. So you can write to your or already talk to your supervisor and to the major project coordinator about those kind of issues, and that is acceptable. Okay. Let's see. Somebody's asking if you can meet after the discuss. It would have to be tomorrow. I have some other things to do that is pressing. I can't meet right now. You'd have to send me an email to make an appointment. This is not a good time for me to meet. Any other pressing question?
Prof.
Mm-hmm.
Afternoon. Do you have the marking scheme ready?
No, I did think about it today. But I just realized the only place I have it right now is in online form used for lecturers, and I need to download it so that you guys can get it.
Okay.
Garisha, do me a favor, just send me an email on the matter, but actually just remember right before the meeting, I was doing something else. So yes, I need to give that to you because I did promise you.
Okay. Also, do you have like sorry, do you have like an outline for chapter 4 and chapter 5? Like you had for chapter 3.
Right. The thing about chapters 4 and 5, they don't really have outlines. You see, here's my okay, I can answer that though. You put it like that. That's what that though. So chapter 4 is it's structured just like chapter 2. There's no formula how to write chapter 2. Literature review. You basically start with the introduction, and then you have all these subtopics, and then you end with a summary that has both the major things that you talked about and the research. Yeah. But what is in chapter 4, the analysis chapter? Basically, if it's on people, so it depends on what the project is about. If it's people related data, you first start out with demographics. If it was even experimental data on some computing data, you'd also want to write about the characters of that data, like if that was somewhat network data, you would still want to give some generic things about the computing data, if it's not about people. So you start out with some basic description as the first section. Obviously, you always have an introduction, but every section, you're going to tell us what you're going to do in the whole chapter. So after you have a little introduction, by the way, you don't call it introduction. So you have like a paragraph or 2 introducing the chapter. And then you have sections, and the sections is going to depend. But in general, you have either demographics or just descriptive data, right? Followed by any kind of analytical statistics. Analytical includes correlation, multiple regression, structural equation modeling, which you haven't learned in this class or in the other class. It includes chi-squared for qualitative data and the like. So any way that you're analyzing the data, like for qualitative, you might do thematic analysis, and you might have a table showing the themes that you found in your research apart from the quotes of the data. all of that would be in, and generally you would separate it either by research questions or by whatever way makes sense. Like maybe the easiest way is after you do some kind of overview and the descriptive stuff, you might want to organize it by research question, but that's not the only way. And by research question, you don't write by the research question, you put it in a noun phrase. You know, so if research question is, do you know one of your research questions, Ms. Palmer? Off the top of your head, can you rephrase it for me? Or you have to look it up?
Prof, I have to look it up. Just a sec.
Yeah, if you put the question, if you put your question, all your questions in the chat, I will tell you what I mean. But the point is, as you're looking that up, you do that, and at the very end, you are going to usually have what is called discussion. Dr. Cobb actually mentioned that earlier. You have a discussion, and discussions are in relationship to the literature. You know, so you had the literature review, you would now compare your results to what other results in other research papers have shown. So that is chapter 4. And then in chapter 5, you just reiterate what your project has been about. You tell us the research questions again. You tell us your conclusion. What's the conclusion? The answers to all your research questions. Then you also have recommendations. The recommendations, remember there are 2 types. There's the theoretical recommendations, how you're suggesting that there should be further research. And there's the practical recommendations, what you're suggesting based on research that people should do in regard to your topic, based on the answers to your research question. But the problem is, chapter 5 really might have a little structure that is formulaic, but chapter 4, it really depends on your project as to how you sort it out. And even on any particular project, there's maybe more than one way. There's probably not more than 2 or 3 ways, but it's sort of like a style. And so I would suggest that you talk to your supervisor about that. I'm waiting for your research question, Ms. Palmer. And while I'm waiting for her, anybody has a question? I was saying no more than maximum hour and a half, and now we're at 4:28. That means that I'm 2 more minutes for the end of this. So I might take it that either this was very helpful or people are so puzzled that they don't know what to ask. I'm not sure what to think. Here's the question. So her research question is, what is the level of interest and use of technology solutions in farm operations among Jamaican small farmers? So for example, in the write-up, they could have, so they're collecting this from Jamaican small farmers. So in the write-up, after you sort of introduce your, you know, in this chapter, we will discuss X, Y, and Z. Then you're going to have, after you pass that, tell us what you're going to do in your chapter, you're going to now have information about the small farmers. So hopefully you collected some demographics about them. So you would know, like, maybe their years of farming, their age, where they are in Jamaica. So all of that would be tables and graphs wrote. So whatever, maybe you also collect about them, their technology, savviness, whatever you collect about them, that's descriptive statistics that will go first. I mean, that's not the question. It's just you're just describing stuff about those Jamaican small farmers in your study. Those the survey characteristics. Then now you get to the research questions. So I could have a section called the level of interest in technical solutions in farming operations among Jamaican farmers. And then I could have a next section on the use of technological solutions in farming operations among Jamaican farmers. My concern about this is that it's really too broad. Are you going to really look at all types of technological solutions? That's just a comment. Hopefully that helps you. And at the end, you just discuss what you found compared to literature. Ms. Palmer, does that make sense?
Yes, Prof.
Wonderful. And hopefully everybody can see the same thing. Now, if instead they had, for example, for the same kind of area project, it could have been experimental. So if, for example, they were using some particular IoT device, because there's so many projects here with IoT in farming, and they were trying to see if that particular IoT device or sensing thing or whatever led to improvement in the farming operations, and it was a pre-post test that was experimental. Instead they would have, like in the last section, it would have like the effectiveness of that tool based on that experiment, and it would have to do the statistical analysis to find that. Yes. Anyway, we're out of time. Next week, Thursday, we'll meet at the same time at 3 o'clock. And I hope everybody is good with the following week, Tuesday. Is that a good time for everybody? Anyway, we'll come next week, Thursday, we'll talk about it. But right now, I'm setting it for Tuesday at 3. Is that good for everybody? Not this Tuesday, no, the following week after that Tuesday. And just to remind you all, major project is on.
It's not going to go.
What's that going to go? Miss Louise, are you talking to me? Or you just have your mic open?
Yes, Prof. I'm saying once it doesn't go beyond 5, it's good for me. Tuesday is good for me.
Okay, all right. All right, so don't forget, Tuesday, May 31st is final Vivo. And it will be during the day. If you want to be after 5 p.m., and it's be between 9 and 5. If you want as a group to be in the evening, you need to tell me by email. The sooner the better. This will be good. Right? Otherwise, you're going to be in the day. Everybody will be in the day unless they write and say you want it to not be in the day. You won't come the day before to say, oh, but we want it in the evening. No, I'm not interested. If you want it in the evening, everybody, please write me a formal email requesting say. Okay, great. Anyway, have a wonderful evening. I'll see you next week. If you want to see me separately, please send me an email. Have a great evening, everybody. Take care now.